when we look at the history of Palestine, we know that this colonial domination began at least as early as 1917 with the occupation by the British and the formation of the British Mandate, because the British did facilitate the colonization of Palestine and they did support the Zionist movement because they wanted to get rid of their Jewish population. So it was even from the get-go, the colonial states and Western powers were using the Palestine and were using the opportunity to create a so-called homeland for the Jews in Palestine as a way to exercise their anti-Semitism. So when we see something like this and we see over time how the land has been taken and the Palestinian people have been displaced and made refugees. And then, of course, the partition plan, which I think many of you can relate to. Partition is never a good idea. Partition is historically speaking for Palestine and I think also for Ireland. Partition is always one of the ways that colonial domination expresses itself. It expresses itself. And then the Nakba in 1947 to 1949, when the Zionist movement and then the Israeli forces forcibly expelled 750,000 Palestinians from the area that came to be called Israel, while another 40 to 60,000 became internally displaced. Then in 1967, when Israel extended its colonial apartheid regime into the rest of Palestine, displacing another 400,000 people, some of them for a second time because they were displaced in 1948. And today, with the Oslo Accords and even before this, the expression of this colonial domination into laws, policies, and practices that continue to displace Palestinians and keep them away. So for us at BADIL, this is what we talk about when we talk about an ongoing Nakba. It's this ongoing system of domination that Israel has created over us that impacts every single Palestinian around the world, regardless of where they reside. And this is what we are fighting against. This is the systems of oppression that they learned at the hands of the British. They learned it at the hands of the United States. They learned it at the hands of those historical colonial regimes. And for Israel, when we talk about the commission of crimes and what they are doing in Palestine, we talk about the forced displacement and transfer, removing the indigenous population or the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, using various policies and practices. And then, of course, colonization, replacing that indigenous population with a settler colonial population, and providing that settler colonial population with privilege within law. So establishing an apartheid regime to control the whole situation, and then at the same time giving us the facade that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East, or Israel is an ally of the West, or any criticism, as you said, of Israel is perceived as anti-Semitism, and so on and so forth. And all of these three things are international crimes, war crimes and crimes against humanity. So the colonial powers also put in place these international legal frameworks that were put forth initially, if I were to assume good faith, put forth initially to prevent colonization, to prevent apartheid, to prevent displacement. And yet they implement these frameworks selectively. They implement them selectively for their friends and their buddies. And yet when we see when we see people being oppressed that are the other, these frameworks are not used, they're disrespected, they don't count anymore. And so what we've seen over the last 76 years is practically a complete trashing. We threw international legal frameworks out the window, and we allowed Israel to continue these, and when I say we, I mean governments, not the people, because the people have been fighting alongside Palestine to undo these systems of oppression for decades and decades. But states have allowed this to continue. And it is why we have to act in order to stop that. So because of this, because we have an ongoing system of domination that uses forced displacement and transfer, colonization and apartheid, when we talk about Palestinian refugees and internally displaced person, we are talking about the largest and most protracted displaced population in the world. And I'm not a numbers person. I don't think numbers actually provide the human aspect, or numbers are numbers. They're a little bit dry. But the reality is when we look at Palestine, we look at a population that 66% of them, 66%, 2/3, have experienced displacement at least once in their lifetime, while significant numbers have experienced it more than once. We're talking about 9.17 million people in total, refugees and internally displaced persons. And the numbers are huge, and it tells you that this is a phenomenon. It's not a one-off. It's not by accident, It's intentional. The fragmentation, the displacement, the isolation, the fragmentation of the Palestinian people, much in the same way they have segregated, fragmented, and isolated the land. So the numbers, I think, also are, in this particular case, the magnitude of the numbers are important, and the fact that it's ongoing. So when we look at, for example, the Gaza Strip, we are talking about 80% of the population of the Gaza Strip are 1948 refugees and their descendants. 80% are 1948 refugees and their descendants. And now they are being displaced multiple times, over and over and over again. Displaced from the north to the center, from the center to the south. And now Israel is even bombing Rafah. And as of yesterday, of the 1.7 million Palestinians who are displaced to Rafah, have been displaced to Rafah, 600,000 are being displaced again back to the center and back to the north, because of the indiscriminate bombing, because of the ongoing invasions and assaults on Rafah. So Israel, in essence, is using displacement and transfer as a mechanism of its genocide, And when we talk about the principles of international law, when we talk about what the Palestinian people are entitled to according to these frameworks that the international community has created, we talk about the Palestinian people's right to self-determination. And we have to examine what this means. What do these words mean? Who are the Palestinian people? They are the Palestinians who are residing inside mandatory Palestine, both in what is called Israel and the occupied Palestinian territory. And they are also the Palestinian refugees who are in exile all over the world. Those are the Palestinian people. And it is their right of self-determination, their right to freely pursue their political and economic freedoms. And the Palestinian right to self-determination is inalienable. What does that mean under international law? It means that it cannot be derogated from, meaning it cannot be changed or altered by anyone, not the Israelis, not the Americans, not the British, not any of the colonial powers, and not even our so-called leadership. Okay. And we are protected persons under international law, which means that Israel is responsible for our protection. So when Israel has been violating international law these last 76 years, it was incumbent on the international community or third-party states to provide protection in the form of actions to the Palestinian people, which they have not done at all. So all we've seen in the last 76 years is the support and enabling of Israeli domination and apartheid, and the continued suppression and oppression of the Palestinian people. And because there is this system of domination and oppression, and because there is this inalienable right to self-determination, the Palestinian people have the right to resist using all means. And so this includes armed and non-armed resistance. Armed and non-armed resistance are legitimate forms of resistance for the Palestinian people under international law. So a lot of people go back to 7 October and they say, well, you know, Hamas brought it onto themselves. It's Hamas's fault that, you know, we have 7 months of genocide. So essentially blaming the victim and blaming those who are pursuing the freedom of their people through the rights that they have been granted by international law and by people of conscience and by, because that's what the legal frameworks are. They were put in place to address those issues. And Israel claims that all forms of Palestinian terrorism, all forms of Palestinian, all forms of Palestinian resistance are terrorism. So even the non-armed forms, like boycott, divestment, and sanctions, was declared by Israel, and many states adopted laws that said boycott, divestment, and sanctions is calling for the destruction of Israel and is anti-Semitic and needs to be criminalized. Even though boycott, divestment, and sanctions is a form used by the people to bring down oppression and to bring down apartheid and colonization. The legal avenues, going to the ICC, the International Criminal Court, going to the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, using the mechanisms within the Human Rights Council, which is things that we do as an organization. Even legal advocacy, paths of legal advocacy have been declared to be lawfare by Israel. So warfare, but using law. And those things, there have been actions taken to prevent Palestinians from going to the courts. And apartheid South Africa has been sanctioned by many states for raising the Genocide Convention at the ICJ. Criminalizing not just armed resistance, but also non-armed resistance. And Israel's claim of the right to self-defense. As the occupying power and the oppressor cannot claim to be defending itself against the people it is oppressing. And the problems here arise when, as you were saying, that all criticisms of Israel are perceived as anti-Semitic. All forms of resistance are relabeled as terrorism, and Israel continues to adopt the position of the victim, even though they are the ones that are doing the aggression. So the labeling of things, or the misinformation and the disinformation, is something that we also have to counter, and we also have to be precise in our support for Palestine. So whenever I come to Ireland, I feel like it's like I can breathe. Really, I can breathe, because you understand what I'm talking about. You know what I'm talking about. And I don't have to defend my identity. I don't have to defend the actions of my people. I don't have to justify every word I say, or every step I take, or every action that has been taken. And I can't tell you how empowering that is, how validating that is, how inspiring that is. And we don't find it elsewhere. We don't find it elsewhere. But because of that, we also have very high expectations. And we recognize all the work that has been done, not just in the last 7 months, but also from the very beginning, by the Irish people supporting Palestine. Unfortunately, however, the colonial powers, Israel's allies, and we know who they are, the United States, the United Kingdom, the European Union, Germany, France, Australia, they have dug in. They have really dug in, and we have seen them, spout some pretty ridiculous stuff. We have seen them spout some pretty ridiculous stuff. And we have seen them even attacking their own people. The student justice movements that have been campaigning and acting and creating encampments at the universities, how they are being treated for voicing their solidarity, not just with Palestine, but as you said, for human rights, for their rights, and how that response has been. So there is a significant fear. I think that colonial powers are afraid because they recognize that the support that Palestine has been receiving has been unprecedented. The situation also itself is unprecedented, and it requires an unprecedented response. And so we as freedom fighters, as human rights defenders, as people of conscience, we need to escalate our actions, as you said, escalate our actions so that they become impactful to our governments to change their positions and their policies on Palestine. And so we need, and who else to do this, or who has the most experience in this than the Irish people, because they took these actions to liberate themselves from British colonialism. They took these actions to support and provide solidarity to South Africa to bring down their apartheid regime. And so you already know what to do because you've done it. You already know what to do because you've done it before. And so this is what we're counting on. Our resistance and your solidarity, which is resistance as well, to liberate Palestine, to end the genocide, and to provide that brotherhood, peoplehood in our actions. Let me just go to specifically on genocide, and then I will stop and we can have a more interactive conversation. When we talk about human rights violations and international crimes, well, at the bottom of the legal frameworks are human rights violations. Okay, so freedom of movement, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom to live, freedom to adequate housing, freedom to adequate standards of living, right to water, right to health, right to education, family unification, residency, etc., etc. Human rights, and they can be violated, and there's a number of conventions. Then we have international crimes, war crimes and crimes against humanity. So we have, for example, forced displacement and transfer, colonization, and apartheid. Then the creme de la creme of prohibitions on international law involve, or there are a set of crimes that are just so heinous, such atrocities, that their prohibition is absolute. And that one of those is genocide. So it's absolutely prohibited under international law. And states have an obligation to stop and prevent genocide using any means. So this means they have to take measures to prevent genocide. They have to cease measures that would cause genocide. And they have to not prevent others from stopping genocide. So issuing sanctions against South Africa is measures taken to prevent others from exercising genocide. Attacking Yemen for seizing the ships that are going through the Red Sea that are going to Israel, This is preventing states from fulfilling their obligations to prevent genocide, because Yemen is actually fulfilling its obligation by seizing those ships. Providing arms, like the UK and the US is doing. This is a measure that supports genocide. And, for example, defunding UNRWA, the UN agency that is most poised and capable and mandated by the international community to provide aid and assistance to save lives in the Gaza Strip. Preventing that agency from getting funding and preventing them from operating is also complicity in genocide. So how do we prevent our governments from being complicit in genocide? What can they do to support the end of genocide? Well, sanctions. Sanctions. The Genocide Convention says that states are obligated to implement anything within their means to prevent and stop genocide. So we've been having this ongoing genocide for 7 months. We've had an ongoing Nakba for over 76 years, and we have had no practical actions taken against Israel to either stop those violations or stop the genocide. So I say the dialogue with the US that the Irish government has been using, when I spoke to members of Parliament, they say that they want to keep the channels of dialogue open because they want to be able to influence Israel with words. And they've been using words for 7 months. And we don't have a ceasefire. We don't have aid going into Gaza. We have Israel continuing to bomb Rafah, continuing to kill Palestinians, continuing to arrest thousands and thousands of Palestinians in the West Bank, forcibly disappearing Palestinians from Gaza, attacking UN facilities, attacking UN workers, bombing hospitals, bombing schools, bombing universities. So all this time, the Irish government has been talking to Israel, and we have not seen any consequence of this talk. Sanctions are what brought down the apartheid regime in South Africa. Sanctions are what will bring down the Israeli colonial apartheid regime. And sanctions are what we needed 76 years ago. And sanctions are what we needed 7 months ago. And so sanctions are what we need today. And we have the power. You all Palestinians on the ground, we are the ones that have the power to do actions to bring about sanctions and bring about an end, not just to the genocide, but to Israel's colonial apartheid regime, and liberate Palestine and ensure the return of Palestinian refugees and internally displaced persons from the river to the sea.